on Ben Cooper Radio, episode 153. Now, we've talked a lot about kind of training and cycling through various things recently because, as you've been aware, I've been playing around with my own kind of training. I've just had my off-season from rugby, so I've been interested in trying to gain some muscle mass and basically hustle in the gym. Now, there is a man that is getting himself more and more around the internet, and his theories are starting to really gain traction, especially after, Dr. Lane Norton has talked a lot about his work, which is fantastic. We're a big fan of Lane Norton. So I thought, let's get the man on the show. Let's talk about muscles. Let's talk about progression. Let's talk about moving forward because, yes, we like to talk about science, but sometimes we really struggle to find the people that can put science into applicable information. There's not many people that cross that kind of boundary, and this man fortunately does. Dr. Jacob Wilson, hello.
Hey, it's great to be on the show, Ben.
Well, thank you for giving up the time. We've got an hour. We're going to get as much science hypertrophy magic out of your brain as possible. And I know you probably find this question a little bit boring in a way, because I know when I do interviews, it's nice to talk about yourself, but you're like, that question where someone goes, so tell us about you, you're kind of like, oh, you kind of almost have to draw breath. But I need people to understand who you are and why we should listen to you. So please give us a bit of your background and tell me kind of why you're in this space.
Yeah, well, what got me into it is I grew up, my dad was an avid sports fan, so he always played sports. I was into boxing and hockey, which I guess kind of go hand in hand. But anyhow, I ended up leaving. I graduated early from high school and ended up playing hockey in Canada, junior hockey. And the guys were real big up there, and it was always hard for me to put on size. So I started becoming obsessed with, well, how do you put on size from a nutrition and training standpoint? And I became obsessed with it. And I ended up looking, whoa, you can go to school for this. So I ended up getting my bachelor's degree in sport nutrition. I got a master's in sports psychology and one in exercise physiology. And then my doctorate was looking at the impact of nutrition and training on sort of the molecular adaptations that occur with training. So it was more looking particularly at skeletal muscle and fat mass. And now I'm currently at a laboratory at the University of Tampa where I head the lab up, also associate director of the graduate program in exercise and nutrition science. And kind of on these topics, I've published over 150 papers and abstracts. So we kind of live, breathe, eat, sleep, training, and nutrition in this lab. Really 24/7 is what we do. And always trying to look at novel techniques to ultimately bridge the gap between science and application.
I love that. I'm amazed that you find the time to run a program at a university level, do testing and your own consulting work, and probably pump for the gains yourself still.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Gotta live it.
Well, I wanna start off by delving straight into the training. You're posting a lot of cool stuff online. We'll talk about your links at the end, but anyone that's not following your Facebook page at the moment should be, because you're posting a lot of really nice, interesting talking points, and you're doing it in a way that's getting people involved in the conversation. And I really like that, because a lot of conversation online aren't often inclusive. They're almost like, this is what I'm going to talk to you about, accept the information or not. And that's really nice from a researcher's point of view. We don't often get that. So I'm going to throw you into a debate. Now, I've just talked a lot about on the podcast recently about my off-season training. I've just gone through a 3-month block of hypertrophy because it's my off-season from rugby. I'm a rugby player. So I said, right, I've got no rugby commitments. I'm going to try and gain as much mass as possible in the shortest amount of time. So I got in the gym, I hustled 5 days a week, lots of volume, drop sets, supersets, giant sets, the lot. We just tried to really go to town. Now I'm now entering into my season and I need to drop my gym volume down. And I've been having a lot of osteopathy work on me as well to try and rebalance my physique, make sure my biomechanics are correct before I go into the season. Now, me and my training partner are at a very similar crossroads. He's been having some work done as well. And we know that we need to do some strength work. We haven't done anything for a while. We need to kind of intensify our training a bit. So I've just drawn up a program with his kind of help that was purely strength based, and he's just been on holiday and was doing a lot of reading about kind of trying to incorporate a more dynamic set of training. I think DeFranco calls it I've forgotten, where you try and combine strength and hypertrophy and a bit of conditioning as well. What's the word? What's that word? I've lost it.
I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean.
We'll just call it a hybrid training program. So he was really pressing, my training partner, Jamie Bell, he was really pressing forward, like, let's do a bit of a hybrid program. Like, first couple of sets, we'll do a strength sets, like let's say squat, deadlift, and then we'll throw in some volume, some lunges, leg press, whatever they might be. And I was like, no, let's focus purely on strength. I find that I get the most strength progression when I focus just on strength. Now, I wanted to get your opinion on this because I kind of feel that you should almost go through intensification and accumulation phases to get almost like the signal and the adaptation properly from the muscle, or do you think there's an argument to do both at the same time?
That's a great question. So I think the biggest thing is that it's just like if someone's like going to school, I think the main theory is, and what we're really talking about is like more classic periodization versus maybe more of a combination, like you said, like a hybrid. Whereas you're kind of using mainly the classic periodized model. Now, one thing we definitely know from the literature is that classic periodization does work. And it works really well. You build up a base of, especially for a sport like rugby, you build up a base of conditioning and then you sort of transmutate that over to strength and power. And one thing we also know is that it is good. The main point about periodization is that you're trying to fitting things into compartments. Obviously, it's just like in school. If I try and take 10 classes at once, I'll suck at all the classes. But if I were to only take 2, then I'd end up having a lot more knowledge in each of those courses. So what I would say is that focusing on certain attributes definitely has a lot of great outcomes. So having a strength phase has a lot to it. The one thing I know from research is there's a study where basically they did a hypertrophy phase and then they ended up doing like a strength phase. Now the group that did the strength phase only, and then there's a group that did a strength phase, whereas basically they did sort of maintenance hypertrophy. So kind of like, for example, in other words, they do all their strength work, and then at the end of the training session, they do a burnout set. So basically one burnout, like one drop set, that was a burnout, and that group made better gains. But I think, so what I'm basically saying is that it's good to essentially go through phases where your primary focus is strength, because if you try to have too many goals, you won't get good at any of them, but to have sort of at least a maintenance stimulus for the hypertrophy work in there. But it's clearly not the main focus. Maybe it's 10% of the focus.
Interesting. So do you think, if, my training partner was arguing that really about 40%, maybe 60% of our work time in the gym be strength and then 40-50% be hypertrophy. Would you argue, or does a literature support that that's maybe too much focus on hypertrophy when your key goal is strength?
I think so, because the main thing is that with strength is, it takes a lot of focus, but also when you've gone through a hypertrophy phase, you've accumulated a lot of fatigue. And if you're trying to optimize strength, you're going to need to back off some of that volume. And that's the main thing, is that people aren't going to realize their gains fully until they back off on some of their volume and allow some of that fatigue to basically dissipate. So if you're keeping in 40% of the time hypertrophy, you're never allowing your body a chance to get rid of that fatigue. And also, again, you're dealing with conflicting goals. It's too much fatigue dealing with hypertrophy and strength at the same time. So I think it's important to have to maintain the conditioning you did in the past, but you're basically we know with tapering that you can maintain a given attribute by lowering volume as much as 80 to 85% on a given attribute you're focusing on. Like Mujaka has done a lot of research on that tapering concept. So basically, the goal is you want to maintain the hypertrophy aspect, but not lose it. So if you completely eliminated hypertrophy, you might lose the benefits of the conditioning that you got for rugby. But if you backed off to where now it's only 10 to 15% of the focus, you'll maintain the hypertrophy gains you made and the conditioning gains, but now you're going to focus primarily on strength and you'll make much better gains. So I think that would be what I would suggest.
Nice. So, okay, I want to package this practically even more. So I'm going to talk about our training program that we did today. So our lower body focus was a front squat, and then a secondary exercise to that was a pistol squat, one-legged pistol squat.
Yep.
With the kind of burnout set, would you focus on kind of a muscle group, or would you go for a compound? So should I do, say, a quad extension burnout and a hamstring curl burnout, or should I just do a 20 rep squat, for example, and try and hit both muscle groups?
I would do both, simply because since strength is a goal, you're trying to mainly just focus on compounds. And usually during a strength phase, I would suggest not having as much isolation in there. So, basically I would, it might be just on your last set, you do your normal set and then you drop it. And then, like you said, burn out with 15 to 20 repetitions on the squat itself. So it's going to only be about 10% of your workout or maybe less. But that, if you're going all out, we know that, especially when you're talking about conditioning, giving everything you have, even for a short period of time, even like a 30-second set, can provide that conditioning stimulus or definitely maintain it.
Nice. Okay. So let's kind of transition more and keep talking about hypertrophy, because I think it's a fascinating topic. And I know you're doing lots of freaking cool stuff yourself. And I want to really just ask you an open question, because you'll come up with what you think's pertinent at the time. I asked some of my coaches. We have a big online coaching team here who coach as part of our company, Body Type Nutrition. One of the coaches, Stephen Box, he's our cover model guy. He looks better than most of us naked, basically. And he kind of asked the open question of, what methods are you currently looking at from a research perspective when it comes to hypertrophy, and why?
Well, great question. So, basically some of the methods that we're using in our lab currently. One thing that we've been looking a lot at is training frequency and its impact on hypertrophy. So here's the thing: we know, Stu Phillips done some good research where basically he took individuals and he had them resistance train. They were completely naive to training; they're untrained. And when they resistance trained, protein synthesis went up, and it lasted for about 72 hours. Now, after 8 weeks of training, he called them trained, which we know someone who's trained for 8 weeks is not trained relative to where they were before they were trained. At that point in time, by 16 hours, they were done with protein synthesis. So protein synthesis wasn't elevated any longer after 16 hours, whereas before it was elevated for 72. So if you take guys like you, Ben, or some of the guys you're working with who have been training for years, it could be very well that protein synthesis, the response that we get to training is much less short. It's much more short-lived. And so originally when we started training, if we're training a body part once a week or twice a week, that might be enough to simulate hypertrophy. But then we start to plateau. The general bro split, like we call it here, is you do one body part once per week. But if your protein synthesis is back down to baseline, you stop adapting within a day, is that ideal frequency. So we've been toying with the idea with actually having a lot higher frequency workouts. So where actually Rostad in Norway's lab, Norwegian Institute of Sport, took powerlifters where they were training bench, squat, deadlift 3 times a week. And basically on the squat and the bench, they took the list and say that they were doing 6 sets Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and said they do 3 sets Monday through Saturday. So same volume, higher frequency. Those people with the higher frequency made way bigger gains in strength and also way better gains in hypertrophy. And it might go to this point that we might need more frequency within as we become more well trained. So that's one of the things we've been looking at. But the next thing we're looking at is we know you adapt to anything. You're going to adapt to anything. So if you're used to high volume, lower frequency, and you switch to high frequency, low volume, you'll probably adapt to that too. So in our lab right now, we're actually looking at what happens when you periodize frequency. And we'll have those results by early fall, where we have one group go from low volume, low frequency, high volume, switch to high frequency, low volume, and then switch back around and periodize it. And my theory is that as you adapt to the lower volume, higher frequency workouts, you'll no longer be adapted to high volume. When you switch back to the high volume, low frequency, it'd be like a novel stimulus. So periodizing frequency, we think, is one of the ways of the future for hypertrophy.
Okay, so taking that frequency into consideration, how do we program that frequency in terms of max effort? Because, part of me in my head is saying, well, if I'm going to train at that low volume per session, I've got to train really hard within that session on that particular movement. So in my head, I'm already thinking of like the Mike Mentzer style of training. So if I'm only going to bench in that session, I'm going to go all out on that 5 sets of bench. And then maybe my kind of pressing type movement is a dumbbell fly 2 days later or whatever. How are you packaging intensity within that session with that much frequency?
Great question. So and I think that could be one of the benefits why it might work well. So say someone's doing one workout, and like you point, they do 5 sets of bench. 5 sets of flies, 5 sets of like a burnouts on dips. Then what happened is now instead of doing one workout, day 1 might be bench, and then they would go max effort on that. Day 2 might be flies. Since they went max effort, they're going to need some recovery, so they do the flies the next day. And then day 3 might be the dips, which are more of a metabolic stimulus. It's not going to be as stressful. Then maybe they take a day off and they start over again. Now, one thing I will say is this. One thing we're looking at in our lab is sort of this auto-regulatory concept of when you should do your training. So if you know you have 3 workouts, one is dips, one is flies, we would say the dips would be moderately hard. The flies might be easy, and the bench press going to be your hardest max effort. Say that you traveled and you come in Monday and you're supposed to do the heavy bench, but you feel horrible, well, on a scale of 0 to 10, you're a 5. Well, that day, you're not going to do your max effort. You're going to do the flies that day. If on the next day you feel like $1 million, you do the max effort. And if on the next day you actually feel moderately good, that's when you do the dips. So you're still getting the same volume, same types of workouts, but you're structuring it based on your capacity to do it on a given day. So I'd say that's kind of how I would structure it.
I think, so with the auto-regulatory training, I get it, and I think it's a fantastic concept, but surely you have to train along the lines that we've been talking about, where you're kind of almost training a more compound, more frequency through big movements rather than breaking down body parts, because, if you've got a leg day and you're only doing 1 leg day a week and you've got to hit the volume, then you haven't really got a chance to auto-regulate that. You've got to do your program. You've got to get in and do your legs, right?
100%, and that's side of the thing too is, which could be the advantage of frequency. It gives you more room to kind of play with sort of auto regulation. Whereas, like if it's leg day, this is my only day. I got to give everything I have on this day, right? So, but you could even say possibly you could even auto regulate that to where if you have a leg day, a chest day, a back day, if your legs are the hardest and Monday you feel horrible, then maybe do chest day that day, and Tuesday, if you feel good, maybe do legs that day.
Sure.
So you could kind of use it in both scenarios, but you're going to have to use it with a high frequency.
Okay. All right. So piecing more of this together, what would you say is the difference between mechanical load and tension?
Great question. So mechanical load basically is one of the main variables that triggers sort of a tension response. So when we think about tension sort of at a molecular level, I'm thinking actually is actual tension on the muscle fibers themselves, actual tension on the actin and myosin cross bridges themselves. So those cross bridges themselves are bearing a load, whereas the mechanical loads on the external, it's causing the tension internally. The reason why I say they're not the same thing is that you can kind of distribute where that tension goes. Because, for example, we know we've been playing around on, like, in our lab and other labs as well have been showing this where, and actually Ben Pakulski, for example, does this a lot. If I'm doing chest, we know research shows that if I focus on my chest, I have more muscle activation in the chest. Whereas if I'm doing bench and I focus on my triceps, I get more activation in the triceps, less in the chest. So the muscle group that's going to be more active will bear more of that tension. So I think that's why I say there's an external load and then there's a tension on the muscle. The external load influences the tension in the muscle, but it's not the same thing, because you can also modify that by your form. You can modify that by your focus, whether it's internal or external. For example, if you look at focus, internal versus external, like I talked about, if I internally focus on the chest, if I'm a bodybuilder, that could be good for chest development, but my bench press will go down. This is research from Dr. Wolf out of UNLV. She's shown that if I have an external focus, that I'll get more activation across all my limbs. So I have more even activation throughout my chest and my triceps. And so I have greater force output. So yeah, it's a real interesting concept, I would say.
So when we talk about in bodybuilding terms, because there's obviously a huge amount of people that are interested in building a physique, both from a performance point of view and an aesthetic point of view, there's no reason why the goals can't be mixed. I'm concerned with looking good naked, as everyone is. What do you think people are missing when they're actually looking about muscle activation? Because there's a huge amount of people in gyms doing mad exercises, even just a simple dumbbell press, and you just look at them moving, and they don't even look like they're activating the pec. The shoulder's taking it, the triceps taking it. What tips would you give people, whatever muscle group they're training, to maximally activate that muscle for maximum hypertrophy response?
Okay, so I'll tell you kind of a research story to answer your question. So one thing we know is it is very important to be able to activate muscle. And like you point out, what seems to separate high-level individuals who are bodybuilders from people who are more amateurs is their ability to activate muscle. So we took Ben Pakulski and we had him do bent over rows. And basically, so Ben, he's IFBB pro, took second to Arnold, and he was really peaked at this point. And we had him do bent over rows, and we progressively increased the weight. And as we increased the weight, we saw there's more and more activation in his rhomboids, like his center back and his lats. No surprise, going up in weight. Then we took an amateur, high-level NPC athlete. We did the same thing. And instead of being a linear response with weight and muscle activation, it actually turned to like an inverted U, meaning that when you first started to increase the weight, you started to see more activation in the center back, and then after, you started to see activation in the center back and the lats go down, and way more activation, for example, in the arms, way more activation in the lower back, spinal erectors. So one of the things that differentiated these two was their ability to target and activate these muscles in a heavier range. So you'll see a lot of people go heavy, and maybe it's actually not as beneficial. It's beneficial for guys like Ben who practice, but maybe not so much for the other guy. So how do you do it? There's a concept sort of where it's you could call it sort of intent, where basically the point is to activate the muscle you're focusing on getting to move, the primary mover, before anything else. So if I'm doing a lat pull down, for example, and I want to hit my lats, then possibly the first thing I'm going to end up doing is depressing my scapula, because what that will do is that'll activate the lats, whereas other people might, for example, flex their arms. And so they're going to get more activation in the arms, but the first thing you do is retract or depress the scapula. Now we're activating the lats. The arms don't even have a chance to activate. Now there's active tension in that muscle group, and then so it's initiating the actual lift. So that's my main thing. The same thing if someone's doing like cable flies or something, for example, the first thing they should do is flex the pecs, contract the pecs, get tension in there before they start moving at the shoulder, moving at the elbows, for example. So I think that's the key, is contracting the muscle first that's going to initiate the lift.
Okay, because one of the things I talked about, I did a video on this actually while I was doing my off-season training, because as I started to really think about my hypertrophy this summer, and especially as I trained with my training partner, who's very clued up on this and done a couple of sessions with Stephen Box, one of our coaches, he's big into this. What people, I would say, a lot of the time are not doing is simply being present in what they're doing. So if you are going to go into a fly, rather than just going in and doing the movement, actually think, right, okay, where's my elbow going to be positioned? What's my line of movement? Can I actually fully activate my pec? Does my shoulder roll over? Does that mean I activate more of my bottom pec and not a lot of my top at all? Do I keep my posture when I fatigue, or does it roll over? And from a hypertrophy point of view, we have to think about being totally present in full activation through full range of movement, through full posture. Otherwise, yeah, like you say, you're not going to get it. But I think simply taking a be present in that movement approach, we can achieve a hell of a lot more.
100%. Being mindful. That's one of the best ways I've ever heard it put, actually, Ben. So I 100% agree with you. Yeah, being mindful of the movement. And you see, like, you go to the gym, people are just going through the motion. Like, oh, let me just do flies, and I got to get 12 reps. All right, let me do 12 reps. I'll rest them, maybe do 12 more. They're more focused on the number of reps they're getting instead of the actual lift itself, right? So, and I think that's absolutely essential, is that bodybuilding is fatiguing the muscle, damaging the muscle, not getting repetitions. That's just a tool to the outcome.
Got ya. Okay. So let's kind of stay on the hypertrophy topic, because I want to talk about time under tension, because probably over the last, definitely sort of 6, maybe 7 years, Charles Poliquin's work's been talked about a huge lot in terms of the hypertrophy realm. He was big with the biosignature stuff, and it was definitely talked about a lot when I was growing up in my PT world. And he always promoted that time under tension was golden. That's what we really need to focus on. So in terms of, traditionally rep range is what's talked about in the difference between hypertrophy and strength. Do we need to think about time under tension, and thus does the rep range become less irrelevant? Can I lift 5 reps and make the set last 30 seconds compared to lifting 12 reps and again making the set last 30 seconds?
Great question. To be honest, I think that they're kind of both end up being good tools. So, for example, where time under tension is important is the fact that, like, if you're doing a 30-second set to 60 seconds, then you'll maximize metabolic stress, because that's when you're maximally using glycolysis, right? Whereas if I'm going to do a set that lasts 10 seconds all out, then I'm probably going to be maximized. I'll minimize more glycolysis, and I'll maximize the ATP-PC system. So I won't maximize metabolic stress, but I'll maximize tension. So I think it's more correlative, the fact that this time under tension is in essence indicative of the system that I'm using. And I think the system will dictate different mechanisms of hypertrophy. So I think, for example, if someone is doing like a set of 15 reps and they do it in 15 seconds, right? Then for them, they may not have maximized the time needed to sort of maximize glycolysis and metabolic stress. So again, it might go back to them being mindful of the set. Had they focused on the set, contracted, squeezed the muscle, it probably would have fallen more within that time range. And sometimes I think it's a good shocking method to say, I'm going to do this set until this time to maximize metabolic stress. I'll keep doing strip sets till I hit this time. But I think it's mainly because of the outcome of maximizing either a metabolic stressor or a mechanical stressor. So I'd say both are important variables to take in consideration.
Okay, because what we could argue is that what you're only really doing is focusing on the tension principle. When if I was going to do a strength set, I want to develop maximal strength. So the last thing I actually want to do is for that set to last 30 to 40 seconds.
Exactly.
The eccentric portion of that rep, if I take 6-7 seconds to do that, well, I'm going to suck on my concentric.
Yes.
So again, surely it comes back to the goal of the program. If the goal of the program is hypertrophy, then by all means take 10 seconds to lower weight down. That's cool, but don't expect to get really strong because you're taking so long bringing the bar to your chest.
100%, and you'll have lower strength output. You'll be less explosive. You'll get less total work done, and that is one of my concerns where people are saying that, because also if you think about when we speak about like time under tension as well. Well, if I'm trying to make a set last 30 seconds, I could do more total work if I had a faster repetition anyway. I get more total repetitions and still have the same tension. So in other words, if I take a set that I can normally do 12 reps with, 1 second up, 2 seconds down, or whatever, 1 second up, 1.5 seconds down, and I make it last longer, or I make each rep last longer, the total time under tension might be not much different, but my total work output is actually less. And so my strength gains will be much lower. And as far as like the speed of repetition, I would say one of the things for strength I always say is that maximally intended sort of velocity is very important, where the weight dictates the speed. You have to have proper form, but you let the weight sort of dictate the speed. Whereas if you're slowing things down, in what sport are you going to slow things down like that? In rugby, if you were focusing on like doing movements slowly, you get your head taken off, right? So I think, why would you do that in the weight room when you're a strength athlete? And there, you can actually argue that slowing the repetition down may actually not even be ideal for hypertrophy because you have less total work. So I think for hypertrophy, it's more as long as you're focusing on the rep and getting maximal activation, then even then, once you've accomplished that, the weight might be dictating the speed.
Okay, so staying on the kind of still packaging this thought process between strength and hypertrophy, do you think heavy strength work is important for hypertrophy?
I do, and I think heavy strength work is important for hypertrophy, and I think mainly it always depends. Like if you have someone who's a hybrid and their goals equal to get equally both, it's one thing. If you have someone who's all I care about is bodybuilding, and then you got a person all I care about is strength, obviously there's are different goals. But I think it's important to have to have strength days to maximize hypertrophy, because one of the main things that triggers hypertrophy is tension itself. So tension on the muscle itself is very important for hypertrophy, but there's differences between powerlifting and bodybuilding. So, for example, if you were to look at like someone doing a 1RM, if I'm focusing on a 1RM on my squat, it's completely different than if I'm doing a set of 12 for hypertrophy in a sense. Because, for example, if I'm going to maximize my weight lifted, I'm actually trying to make the lift easier, more efficient as possible. And I might use my belt. I'm going to use a bunch of techniques to make that lift as easy as possible. Same thing with the bench press. If I'm trying to maximize strength, I'm going to have an arch in my back. I'm going to try and lessen the distance from the bar to my chest. All of these things are important. Whereas for hypertrophy, it's the opposite. I'm trying to maximize the distance from the bar to, the distance from my chest all the way to the lockout point. I'm actually trying to make the movement harder. So if someone's a pure bodybuilder, they should have heavy days, but they should be doing the lift in such a way that it's harder and not easier. So they go to a heavy day and they're trying to make the movement more efficient. That might not be ideal. So they're getting stronger and more of a bodybuilding framework. Again, like going back to the bench press, I'm not going to have a huge arch and lessen the distance that I'm going, but I'm still going to lift heavy that day. Whereas if I'm a power lifter, you should maximize form on on all these repetitions, even possibly on hypertrophy days. So that'd be the difference between the two. Strength's still important for tension, but the way you perform the lift is going to be different than, say, powerlifting.
Because I think if we package all this in the context of bodybuilding and just being in the gym, it actually becomes a lot easier to package our theory, purely because as a bodybuilder, your focus is just in the gym and the response from the muscle. So there is nothing wrong. Like you've said, what you want when you shift from one program to the other is to force a muscle to adapt to a new stimulus. So it's perfectly good to go from a hypertrophy phase to a strength phase to a power phase and keep the focus, because that's the aim. You're just trying to force a body to adapt. Now, what I want to bridge is how all this theory relates to a performance-based athlete, which is me. There's lots of people out there that play sport, and we have to juggle this. Now, I hate going through a strength phase and then going into something else and seeing a 30-40% strength drop off. Now, we talked about going from hypertrophy into a strength phase and almost keeping 10% of your program as hypertrophy. Now, would you do the same when going from a strength program into hypertrophy? So if I was, after this strength phase, going to go back to hypertrophy for 6 weeks, should I keep 10% of my training program strength? So maybe start with an A1 strength squat and then do all the rest of the program as volume. Would you keep that theory the same for performance athletes?
I would, and I think it's very important that people don't lose a lot of the attributes that they gain in a certain strength phase. So especially if you're doing like anywhere from 1 to 3 months of hypertrophy, by the end of the third month, you're no longer going to be as adapted to all of those strength and neural adaptations you made. So I think starting the session off with a heavy set is going to ultimately sort of could possibly potentiate the hypertrophy training itself. But also you're going to maintain all those gains that you made. You'll maintain your ability to lift heavier in sort of a hypertrophy range, which is going to be optimal, for making gains in muscle.
I think this is really important because I think people feel that they have to go through these different phases and focus, but we need to bear in mind that programs you need to maintain adaptation. Like, it freaking sucks losing stuff that you've worked so hard for. So I think right now, if anyone is a performance athlete listening to this, keep 10%, 15% of your program as the last program and keep that undulating to make sure that no one wants to go back and have to work from 150 to 200 again in their deadlift. That sucks balls.
Exactly. Sucks horrible. Yeah.
So I want to try and kind of box off the considerations for hypertrophy for a lot of people. So if someone's thinking about their hypertrophy progression right now, what do you think are the key 2, 3, 4, 5 factors that you want people to mentally and physically consider to maximize their hypertrophy progression in the gym?
Great question. So basically, to maximize hypertrophy, what we got to do is focus on all the methods that trigger hypertrophy. One of those is going to be tension, which kind of goes hand in hand in some ways with motor unit recruitment. We want to be able to recruit the fast twitch fibers. We want to get metabolic stress, which is like that lactate response that you sort of get. And then we want to maximize cell swelling. So if we look at how do we do each of those, tension is kind of what we talked about. 2 ways we can do that is lifting heavier weights, but also focusing on where the tension is actually going to be. It should be on the target muscle group itself. So lifting heavier and or even resting longer periods of time allows you to maintain tension. So the 3 ways are heavier weights, longer rest period lengths, and where you're focusing the tension to be placed. So that's going to be an important phase for any bodybuilder, anyone trying to increase size. The second thing, and then also I said motor unit recruitment. So we have our slow twitch, we go all the way up to our fast twitch fibers, and those are recruited with heavier weights. Then we're going to want to focus on, again, the metabolic stress and the swelling, and those seem to go together. The swelling being the pump that people get in the gym, and the metabolic stress being the burning. So one of my friends, Dr. David Gunderman, for his dissertation, he actually took muscle fibers and he actually cultured them, and he exposed them to lactate, and it triggered protein synthesis. So we actually think this is a sort of a growth factor in a sense. So basically what it means that how do you do that? That's going to be more of like your 8 to 12 repetition sets. Your rest period lengths are going to be shorter, like anywhere from 30 to 90 seconds, probably no more than 2 minutes. Like if you're doing squats, it's going to be real hard to rest 30 seconds, obviously. But 2 minutes 90 to 2 seconds to 2 minutes might be good. And most people aren't used to the 1 minute rest. When most people are like, oh yeah, I rest a minute. What that means is that a minute's gone by, they look at their watch, they set up their whatever music to what the next song is. They pump themselves up. They put their weight belt on. By the time they've gotten underneath the rack, it's been 3 minutes. And like in our lab, when every single time we said, "Oh, you have a minute rest," like, "Oh yeah, I do that all the time." When we do squats and we have 1 minute rest, almost invariably half of the people throw up on the day one because they're not used to it. So that's this extreme sort of method. So rest period length is going to be essential for building up metabolic stress and cell swelling. Supersets, giant sets, like you were just talking about doing in your phase, Ben, previously, are going to be important. So those are going to be all the variables that I would say are important to maximizing each of the variables for hypertrophy.
Awesome. Brilliant. Now, I think that helps out people that have been training a little while, because they almost now know how to package their training to maximally stimulate things. If you were to work with someone that, like, day one, they were gonna train with you for the next 3 years, 1 to 3 years, never been in the gym before. Where do you think the foundation needs to start, and where would you take them? Because I think a lot of people that are new to the game kind of go, well, do I need to start with strength, hypertrophy, movement, coordination, activation, body weight? How would you help someone who's newer?
Great question. So if someone's newer, the biggest thing is, I think, like you pointed out, teaching people to be mindful is going to be essential, and then teaching people the movement patterns themselves. If someone doesn't know how to squat and they're going to go into a strength phase or a hypertrophy phase, they're going to program improper motor patterns. And I think basically it's sort of teaching them movement patterns and a number of variations of those patterns is the first thing I would focus on. So it's going to be more form than anything else. And so as long as they have form, that's going to be key. We want to set up a nice motor program for each of the basic lifts: the squat, the deadlift, the bench press, the military press, lat pull down, pull ups, all the basic patterns that everything is sort of centered around. That as long, like, if I can do a squat and I can get that down, well, I can always vary my stance. I can bring it in, I can bring it out. But if I can't get the basic stance down, then I don't have a foundation to build off of. Once I've done that, then I condition the individual. If someone is just started training, they don't have a lot of muscle, it might not be advantageous to do strength because they need to build muscle before that. So and they might not be even conditioned to handle that type of load. So first thing, I put them through a conditioning cycle for a couple months probably, and then I start to teach them to lift in a strength phase. And their first strength phase probably won't be like one to 3 repetitions. Their first strength phase might be 6 to 8 repetitions, whereas they're coming down from more like anywhere from 8 to 15. They might go to 6 to 8 on their first strength phase. So and then they might start to be able to learn how to do the 1 to 3 repetition range after that, which they'd have more of a strength power phase. So I take them through a very elongated, traditional periodized model for year 1. And then after year 1, I might increase the frequency of undulation of that. So instead of doing every several months the new phase, then they might vary it more frequently, maybe every 1 to 3 months, and then they might go through a phase where they, after that year, where they are going to end up doing varying even every week, to every day, depending. The goals you might have a focus for 1 to 3 months, but the variation within that goal might be more frequent. So that's kind of a brief overview of what I would do with an individual.
Nice. And the reason why I kind of wanted to get to that is because there's always new users coming onto this podcast all the time, and I never know really, where people are at. And most new users will look at the magazines, the kind of articles, the bodybuilders and what they're doing, and they're all doing, body part splits. That's most of the information that's provided. And I think that's probably the worst way to start off as a new trainer, because like you said, if you don't know how to move your pec, your shoulder girdle, and you start doing 40 sets of high volume through the pec, all you're going to do is wear out your shoulder joint, have poor biomechanics, and an over pronation. It's just going to end up in a mess.
100%, man. I totally agree with you.
And the amount of young people that I see that have got joints worn out, overdeveloped certain areas, I'm just like, oof. And I suppose that's why I'm trying to increase the knowledge of the average user, because Otherwise, it's just such a long journey to undo all this kind of damage. I know the damage that I did when I was a young and naive trainer. I screwed up my shoulders, my hips weren't great, had overdevelopment in my back and my traps because I rode like an idiot. And I just don't want to see people make the same mistake. But it's tough because people want to always run before they can walk. And getting in and doing a massive chest day is running before you walk.
100%. 100%, Ben.
Dr. Jacob Wilson, this has been a wicked show. I did want to get into the nutrition side of it, but we've pretty much got a 45-minute show out of just training. So it is totally up to you whether you come back on the show. I would willingly accept you back on the show to talk about diet and nutrition when your schedule permits. But
I'd love to be back on.
Brilliant. Well, for today, we'll leave it at that. Otherwise, I'm going to take up far too much of your time. Please let people know now where they can find you, where the best place is to see your information, apart from Facebook, which I've mentioned, which you are putting out some great content on.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see us on Instagram and Twitter on @themuscleprof, and we actually I have my normal Jacob Wilson on Facebook, but we just started at the Muscle Prof on Facebook fan page as well. And we put out information every day, different training tips, different studies that we're doing, because oftentimes it takes months, sometimes years, to get a study you did out into the public. But we actually let you know what we're doing right away. And we'll also even do sometimes experiments of the week and sort of post it up in real time. So yeah, you guys can follow us at the Muscle Prof, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys. And Ben, thanks for having me on the show.
Dude, you are welcome. Look, people, if you're interested in strength and hypertrophy, go and follow Dr. Wilson. Information's fantastic. The videos are interactive. You're getting loads of engagement. If you enjoyed this show, please do us a massive favour and let us know what you think. Tag us both in on Twitter. Get a conversation going. Me and Dr. Wilson are more than happy to share experiences, give you tips, and also it's just nice to know that this information doesn't fall on deaf ears. Interacting with you guys is one of the most rewarding parts of our work, so please do engage with us. If you see the show go live on social media, please share it. Please tag a friend in the post. Let other people see this information. It's valuable, it's free, and it can't go on deaf ears, so please share it around. Dr. Wilson, thank you again.
Thank you.
We'll get you on to talk about diet at some time. Thank you all for listening. I will be back on the show with Rachel next week with our standard Q&A show to talk about all your questions. So in the meantime, that's goodbye from me and goodbye from Dr. Wilson. Hey everyone, Ben Cooper Radio, episode number 152. Me and Rachel are back in the house. There's no guests. We're back to the male-female duo. That is, we don't really have a name, do we? Perhaps we should have a name.